Is a vacuum in the background?
No, the people cutting the grass, and it seems to
Uh,
be like the case every single time that I do the Neo Human podcast. So synchronicity, right?
it finds your weak spot. Your weak.
All right. Hello and welcome to the 56th episode of NEOHUMAN podcast. I'm Agha Bahari, a Dogologist on Twitter and Instagram, and you can follow the show on liveandlimbo.com, iTunes, YouTube, and BitChute. And with me today, I have Sky Nelson Isaacs. Welcome to NEOHUMAN podcast, Nelson. Sky,
Thank you,
sorry.
Aga.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you.
I really love your show.
Oh yeah, which episodes did you listen to? I know that you were listening to Chris Nebar. Have you listened to
Yes.
any other episode?
Yeah, the most recent one. I forget the guest's name, but last week's.
William Irvin about
Yes.
Stoicism.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah,
And I love your approach to was it specifically in the Chris Nebar episode about left and right brain and how we're in a time in history where we are learning how to navigate that and to let go of our hold on the left brain and open up to a different part of ourselves. All of the conflict that we experience in the world right now is related to a conflict-oriented mindset that comes from that left brain reliance.
right. And yet the conflict itself presenting the situation that is an opportunity for us to discover all of this, right? Because
Yes.
we're moving from decades of having some kind of at least illusion of order in a socio-political spectrums that, oh, we know what to do, we know what's the right thing to do, we know the right direction. And my argument is that because of democratization of information, because every individual now has the way to be heard and express him or herself, now we are dealing with this sense of chaos and uncertainty. Yet for me, that is at the nature of everything, that we create order based on our own subjective perspective as out of the inherent chaos and uncertainty that exists in the universe.
Yeah, and the way that the process, well, I'm sure we'll dive into, that I call meaningful history selection, that gives rise or can give rise to synchronicity. The way it works is through choosing which branches of that particular what we call a tree, choosing which order we're creating through the choices that we make. And so our mind is controlling how we respond and react to the world, what choices we're making, and our life unfolds as a story or a narration of those very choices.
That's awesome. We're definitely going to talk about all of this, but let's start from your background, the work you've done, the lives you've lived, and what are you mainly focused on now these days?
I studied physics in college about 20 years ago and got into physics accidentally, not surprisingly, with the theme of my book. And I had studied with or grown up around an Eastern spiritual teacher that came to the West and was my parents' guru. And I learned about, not about anything, I learned by watching and being exposed to that community, I learned what it meant to seek for truth without being satisfied with the top layers of truth that what people tell us or what seems to be happening on the surface of a conversation or the surface of a relationship. I learned that there seemed to be something underneath all of that was happening. And to me, that's the definition of my spiritual path, trying to get underneath what's happening on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really immersed in that, and that's a central part of how I've approached the world. And then in college, I ended up I was a musician. I'm a musician like you, and I love your music, by the way. I've been checking out some of your tracks. Yeah, and I'm coming out with an album next year. First release is coming out in February.
Oh, awesome. We'll have you back to talk about your music then as well.
Great. But in the first year of college, I had hand problems. I was trying to play all the time and practice, and I couldn't. So I had to switch. And my girlfriend at the time had a father who I was having a conversation with, and he said, I always thought the physicists seemed to be able to solve any problem that they came across, and I was really impressed by that. So I was impressed by him, and I wanted to impress him, and I ended up taking a physics class that summer and catching up and being a physics major for the rest of my career. So I got into physics through that kind of backdoor synchronicity, and it's the same process of seeking truth, but seeking truth through a different language, through the fundamentals of what we're doing in the physical world, what space and time is. And it's amazing in physics because the first thing you study, and one of the first things I would teach my students when I was a high school teacher, is experiments with measuring space and time. Like, how far does this car roll in 1 second? How far does it roll in 2 seconds? How far does it roll in 3 seconds? We're studying basic relationships of distance and duration. It's the first thing we learn in physics. And yet when you get to the end, some of the most advanced topics that are being studied right now by the people like Carlo Rovelli, studying his book is called The Order of Time. People don't understand what time is, and people don't understand what space is. We have theories about it, but none of our theories quite capture the essence of what those things are. They're sort of like postulates at the bottom of everything that we build our theories on top of. And that's always really inspired me that there's unknown things at the base of our theories. There's things that we haven't figured out that are really fundamental. And so that's where I've been focusing my effort and my research, is trying to understand what the basic foundation of the world is. And we can talk more about that from a scientific perspective. I released a book last February, which is called Living in Flow. I realized when I was writing this book that the reason synchronicity is so interesting to me is because it leads me every day to experience of flow with my life, which by that I mean being willing to be wrong, being willing to see experiences around me from an objective perspective and not just through my own filters, and recognize each event in life as providing the possibility of guidance in the direction that I might be useful to me. Even obstacles or conflict that come up, like seeing that from a perspective of, where is this leading me? How can I humble myself in a bit, or look at what is my hang up or my weak point here, rather than pointing the blame at somebody else or being a victim to the circumstance. So synchronicities show up in life, I think, to empower us on a path of exploration. And when we can see it that way, I think it's extremely empowering and a positive message.
This crossway between science and spirituality, this is something actually I asked Chris Nebar too, that people in academia, a lot of them seems to be very hostile towards spirituality and anything that is not aligned with their what would be acceptable to be published in their scientific journal, basically. So he explained a little that he had received hostility and experienced basically rejection with respect to mixing this, not even mixing in a conscious kind of a way. It seems to be inevitable that a lot of science and a lot of spirituality in different ways, they're coming together to explain bigger concepts that, as you said, we can describe time and space, but we don't really know what it is. So how have your experience been in that era?
Well, I see it as part of the process of being in flow, that I'm in the process of, you asked what I'm working on recently, and I have a paper that I'd like to publish, which is not the only one I've written in the past couple of years, but it's the one that captures the essence of what I'm trying to show from a perspective that is accessible and acceptable in a mainstream perspective. And it doesn't really reach beyond into stuff that I know would be controversial. It's trying to provide a framework based on the science and the mathematics of holograms to show that the world we live in some very real ways reflects the mathematics or the form of holograms. And that has, a hologram is a two-dimensional piece of paper or film that looks like a three-dimensional image. And so this idea captures the essence of some actually more controversial things, like the Hindu idea of Maya, or illusion. How is the world, in some sense, an illusion that we're presented with in the moment to, in some sense, test us in various ways, or the way I like to phrase it is to have us learn and grow and evolve in who we are, and maybe most importantly, to heal. And so the research I'm doing right now really aims at understanding the world we live in as a video game in some sense, which is allowing us and providing us the experiences we need to heal in our lives and peel away layers of conditioning and defense that we've built up in our childhood. And by doing that, work. I mean, we can do that work without this model. There's a lot of people teaching wonderful things. Brene Brown does wonderful work on vulnerability and many other ways. You talked about the power of now in a previous episode. All these teachings aim at the same thing, which is to heal the parts of ourselves that are defending ourselves to each other or attacking each other, and it's really about a self relationship. How are we treating ourselves? Because when we treat ourselves a certain way, that comes out and gets reflected in the outside world. Mm-hmm. So I have begun to see and show with the mathematics that the world we live in is more like a hologram, which presents itself to us in various ways, various experiences that are designed, in a sense, to reflect what it is that we're going through in the moment, so that it can help us heal and grow.
I totally resonate with this perspective of life as a video game. And it's interesting because something like maybe 10 years ago, 9 years ago, I started looking at life as a movie that I was the main character in. But then I came to the conclusion that it is a video game because you have choices to make, but the options are provided to you. It's not that it's scripted. And that really goes back to the concept of free will that we can talk about it. So it's really interesting that, again, as I said, I haven't even gone to college or university. I went to film school and I spent half of that 1 year, experimenting with psychedelics. But I truly learned more from that experience, I believe, than if I wanted to go and, get like a bachelor in four-year university without having any kind of an interest in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so to finish the question, because I sort of forgot what you had asked, which was how does academia respond?
Right.
I think that there is room. My perspective is we need all sorts of experiences. And one of the things I love about your website and the principles of the ecology is we are human first.
Yep. That
we are having a human experience, and there are so many ways to do that. And it's can be very challenging to recognize that the way we're doing it looks different from someone else's way. And part of what's difficult in academia is it's also funded like a business. So there's not really room for the same type of creativity that created the fields that we have. For instance, quantum mechanics was born out of a certain type of creativity that was present in the people of that time. And I think the industry right now is built in such a way that it precludes that kind of fundamental thinking. It's hard to get that kind of work noticed. Yet, I think this is the crucial teaching of living in flow. That is not an excuse to feel victimized. Mm-hmm. It is up to us to see the system that we're part of, not as a bunch of people who are, getting in the way, but as a system, as part of this video game that we're involved in, that we can level up in, we can find our way into. And that's where synchronicity comes in, to give us the way in. It's not up to us to get somebody else's permission, but to find our way in. Everybody has barriers in their life, no matter what industry you're in, no matter what part of your experience you're dealing with. And empowering ourselves through, for instance, through synchronicity, to notice what are the opportunities presenting themselves to me right now that will allow me to work my way into the situation I want to be in, regardless of whether there's a problem with the funding or financing or closed-mindedness. That's always the case in certain ways. There's always obstacles. So I think that I would like to see science expand its ability to capture broader ideas and to be more open-minded. I had the experience with my master's thesis advisor that I couldn't really talk to him about the stuff that was really interesting to me. And that left me with a sense of grief that was actually a relationship I really cared about. And at this point in my life, I wish I had more contact with him about what I'm doing, because I think he would like it. But there's elements of the way I think about things that he wasn't wanting to talk about. And I think that's unfortunate. Regardless of whether we agree, we should be able to understand that there's validity to every perspective, as long as it's grounded in some kind of rigorous approach to thinking.
Yeah, this creativity and business, it really happens across many different areas. Same thing in music industry, that Frank Zappa was talking about it, that in late 60s and early 70s, people who were running the music labels, these were, rich men who, they were smoking their cigars and were like, I don't know how this album would do, just put it out and see how it would do. And if it does
Yeah.
well, you release another one. So a lot of creative and weird things happen in that period, but it evolved into hip people. This is a term that Frank Zappa used. Hip young people started taking over, and they came up with the idea that I know what's good, I know what you
Uh-huh.
should listen to, and then it became business, and business is conservative. So you don't take the risks and chances, whatever that makes money. You want to, milk it
Yeah.
dry, basically. The same thing happened in the movie industry, but it seems like people are sick and tired of it in those areas.
Yeah.
Even in academia, I had Peter Boghossian talking to him on the show last week, and he's an academic, and he's sick and tired of it. And exactly what he was talking about with respect to journals, that these are very few individuals who determine what can be published, and all the professors and teachers who want to get some kind of a tenure, want to go up this hierarchy, they just, they don't care about the truth. They care about what is acceptable based on that principle and standard. But as you were saying, and Stoics are saying the same thing, that it is what it is, just make the best out of it.
Well, I think they do care about the truth as far as they understand it.
Right.
And it's the same with me. I care about the truth as far as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to stay on a path where I keep expanding or questioning my understanding of what the truth is. And that is the hallmark, I think, of somebody on a path that can grow and change. If they consider themselves on a path that they're not even sure whether it's the right path, they're questioning it, they're questioning their values, then there's an authenticity there that is relatable and stays honest, because as we learn new things, we change.
Yeah.
Whereas I think other people who don't do that may still be on a pursuit of truth, but the problem is that when they find a truth that satisfies them, then that becomes it's just a human quality to have difficulty not getting rigid around what we believe.
Mm-hmm.
I think ultimately, and this is what I teach in my course that just launched this month, the Living in Flow course, ultimately we are belief machines. What we're after in the study of consciousness is understanding not the physical world and not how consciousness affects the physical world, but how our belief itself, what that is, and how that filters everything that we experience and actually influences the experiences that come to us through the beliefs that we have. And there's always the ability to go one level deeper in our beliefs and realize that, oh, what I'm thinking about right now is still a belief about the world that I created based on my past experiences. And so by letting go of those beliefs, and we do that, like for instance, it's very, very tangible, very grounded. We get out of flow a lot of the times because we resist feelings that we're having. Somebody says something to us and we feel maybe some shame, or we maybe feel some disappointment, and we push away that feeling because we don't want to feel that. But as soon as we push that feeling, we do that by taking some action, doing something in the world which tries to solve the problem. This is the left brain thinking, right? We try and solve the problem, and the problem being really just that we have a feeling we don't want to experience.
Mm-hmm.
So we try and get rid of that feeling by solving the problem in front of us. It might be somebody else. We're trying to solve their problem or trying to make them different. When really what's needed is to allow in whatever it is that's ours that we're trying to resist, so that we can get into our flow and see, oh yeah, there's something here that I'm holding on to from my past. Like, I don't want to feel disappointed around leadership and authority. I get really upset when somebody who's in a position of leadership disappoints me, because that's how my relationship with my parents was, or somebody when I was young. And so we do all these things to avoid having that experience. But when we can actually have that experience, then we can evolve into a situation and actually heal it and make choices in our behavior that unravel the problem rather than reinforce the problem.
Yeah, one of the principles that I live by is any tragedy is an opportunity for something beautiful.
Yeah. 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 So there's an exercise that I teach in the course and in my workshops that is about synchronicity as a process of healing. So if we see healing as a process of uncovering hidden emotions, we have some hidden feeling, like I was saying, I get upset or feel unsafe when somebody in a position of authority lets me down, then every time that experience happens or something that triggers that experience, we go into reaction mode. And so in that reaction mode, the way we react is usually going to make things worse. I come into conflict with this person or question their ability, and that makes them feel a certain way and respond to us defensively. And so then we find ourselves in this ongoing, perpetuated situation that we're very familiar with. We're like, I've been here before. Every time this happens, I get in this situation, and what I say makes it worse. So we can actually get out of that cycle. This is where the opportunity for growth and healing comes in every bad situation. When we see this cycle happening and we see that we've put ourselves deeper into it, we can pay attention, what I call the Lorax process, listen to it, open our minds, and then reflect on the situation and realize that we want things to be different. We want to heal this part of ourselves. We don't want to keep having the same repetitive experience in our life. And as our desire to heal becomes activated, then we automatically start to anticipate opportunities for healing. We anticipate future experiences in which we feel differently, because that's what we want. We want to feel differently. We don't know what that's going to take, but we anticipate that that's going to happen. And this is all subconscious. It's just what our body does. We start holding on to that feeling of wanting to change. And that, through this process of meaningful history selection that I present in my book, it selects out the branches of all the possibilities on the tree that are more likely to bring us that healing. And that probably involves another situation that triggers the same emotion, because the healing is going to come from a synchronicity which shows up, which makes me feel unsafe again in the same way with authority. And so suddenly I get triggered again, but this time I've been paying attention to my inner process. And so I see what's going on and what the cycle is. And when I get triggered again, I have an opportunity to step out of the cycle.
You become the observer.
Yeah. And you realize what it is that's triggering you. You realize that, oh, many years ago, when this happened with my father or my mother or somebody else, it made me feel unsafe. And I realize that I'm not actually unsafe now, and I have more tools to speak up for myself. And so actually, it's very easy to not react anymore, because I see that I'm just having this thing play out in my mind. So once we understand it, and that's where our left brain becomes really useful, because the understanding we can have of our emotions and where they come from gives us the ability to then actually emotionally let go of them and release, which is the step we take after reflecting on it. We release, and then from there, after releasing, we're able to act. And the action, though, it comes from being aligned with the circumstances, having paid attention to and reflected on what's really going on, both outside and inside myself, and then being in a position to act and seeing a way through the dilemma that helps. And that's what I would call flow, where the situation unfolds in an optimal way that benefits everybody involved, not just my own ego.
Which is the title of your book. It's called Living in Flow, The Science of Synchronicity and How Your Choices Shape Your World. So let's talk about your book, but starting with defining the term synchronicity. You use it a couple of times, but some people might not even know what that means.
A synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence. It was identified by Carl Jung, the psychologist. And he identified very specific things that are kind of out of the ordinary. Like, I'll give an example from my life where the really big synchronicity that I can point to is when I was 20 and I was traveling through Europe, and my good friend was also traveling in Israel. And we just decided we were taking some time off school to travel separately. And we had known each other for a long time. And we made a plan to meet on a beach in Greece. But my plans got derailed because I got sick while I was traveling, and I had to fly home through Paris. So I changed my plane flight to be a couple days away. I went to Paris, was about to get on a plane to go back to California. She got tired of waiting for me to call in Israel, and her friends invited her to go to Paris for the weekend. And she immediately said, no, I got to wait for Sky to call. But then she finally changed her mind and hopped on the plane with them and went to Paris. And in the one day that I had before my flight, I went to the Louvre Museum. And would you believe that we bumped into each other there? So, I mean, I've calculated the odds of that and shown that it's unreasonable to ascribe that to just chance. It's just it defies the odds enough in incalculable ways that it's not reasonable that I would run into her. Precisely, well, partly because she ended up being my life partner ultimately down the road.
That's awesome.
And we had known each other for a long time. We were best friends at that point. But the real synchronicity is that we had intended to meet a couple weeks later in Greece. So there was this intention that was in place that was fulfilled in a very different way when life got in the way. So that's a huge example of synchronicity. But then there's an example of taking my daughter to Home Depot looking to solve a sprinkler problem. I had a sprinkler that was spraying water too much, and I wanted to recapture some of that water pressure. So it's just a typical home gardening project. And I take her to the store, and she's like 6 at the time. And I'm looking at this shelf full of pieces, right? Different sprinkler heads and pieces of pipe. And she's kind of nagging me like, Dad. I'm thinking to myself, I got to stay patient. I got to stay calm. I just need to get my piece of hardware and get out of the store with us both being safe and whole. And I pick up a piece, I'm looking at it, and she says, Dad. And I say, what is it? And she holds up a thing and she says, is this the right thing? And I look down at her with kind of pity in my eyes and say, no, honey, I'm looking for a sprinkler head. And that's kind of like, looks like a cap, it caps off the hose. But then I followed that process I was talking about, the Lorax, to listen to the situation, notice what's happening, open my mind, like be willing to think that maybe I'm wrong, maybe she has a point, and then reflect on it. And by reflecting, I noticed that the solution I had to get a low pressure sprinkler head was an okay solution, but she had a different one, which was to cap it off completely. And I realized that would solve my problem better because it would give me more water pressure in the rest of the yard. And I just opened my mind to that and released my attachment to what my plan was, and realized that I asked her where she found that piece, and it was sitting on the shelf in between the buckets, like on its own. So how did it get there? Somebody came along the day before, had this piece they didn't want, was too lazy to find where it goes. They just stuck it on the shelf. And then today my daughter finds it right in that place and hands it to me. And it's the right thing, the right size, the right threading, all that for my problem. So the question of synchronicity is, how do the moments of a given day fall into place in such a way that it brings us satisfaction or resolution to a goal that we have or a problem that we're dealing with, or a way in which we can grow and heal in our lives? How do the events of life fall into place in meaningful ways?
Now, this brings a very interesting question, that when people say that things happen for a reason, for the longest time, I used to think that they're saying that because things happen for a reason, because another thing's supposed to be happening. There is a goal and an objective that these things are happening to head there. But then I realized things happen because of where we have been and because of how things have evolved. So it's not like 2 + 2 is going to be 4 because they're supposed to be 4. It just 4 will happen because there is 2 + 2. Is that right? Or is there some kind of a big picture objective and a goal?
Well, you said it earlier about choice.
Yeah.
That the model in my book is a tree, and you're always at the base of this tree. This is like a decision tree or an event tree of your life. And as you move through life, you're moving along the different branches. And if you're familiar with the many worlds hypothesis in quantum mechanics,
right,
it's the same mathematics.
Which I want to talk about that too a little later, because it completely resonates with what you're talking about.
Yeah. So as we move through this tree, sometimes we're making choices ourselves to move on a given branch. Sometimes things happen to us which put us on a given branch. That's part of the branch. And every choice we make certainly is a branching, but some of those choices are more relevant than others. Like when you're deciding between quitting your job and going back to school versus staying in your job, there's different pros and cons with each of those. And it's a big life decision because one branch leads to a very different set of features than the other branch. So one way to really notice synchronicity in your life is to notice when you are up against really decisive moments. These are what I call meaningful experiences. And to have the wisdom and the presence of mind and have meditated or done analysis of yourself in some way, be aware enough of yourself to have a method for how you make those choices. Now, the other thing about this tree is that it's an apple tree. The apples are sitting at the top of the branches, right? That's in the future. So the choices we make in the present, the effort we put into life in the present and in the past, the momentum that we've built in our choices, it's identifying apples on the tree. It's saying, okay, you're putting effort into going back to school and having a new career. There's an apple over here that has to do with a program that will really work for you, that's close to home, that you wouldn't have to leave your home for. And there's an apple over here for a program that has money to give you a scholarship, but you have to move house, and that'll work for a different set of reasons. And so your choices in the past and the present that have built momentum, they build momentum by highlighting certain apples on the branches of the tree. And those apples are the goals, essentially, the ways that your experience can be fulfilled. And they weigh down those branches. So any branch that has a lot of apples at the top of it will become heavier. And so there is this way in which our choices highlight or select the future options which resonate with the choices we're making. And by weighing down that branch, they make it more likely to happen. So they make something in the present, like finding an advertisement on a bookshelf at a bookstore for this particular school, that becomes more likely to fall in your lap because it leads to an experience, an apple that you're seeking to have in the future.
And it happens on a subjective basis, right? Like we might cross path and have mutual kind of goals, momentary or short-term goals, but at the end of the day, what did Nietzsche said, that each person carries its own cross?
Yes, well, I think that's a beautiful aspect, and it ties back into your statement that we are human first. This whole model is based on relationality, this concept that the world is defined like a video game to be presented to you as an individual. And there's a video I launched just about a month ago that goes into this. It's about a half an hour video that I encourage your listeners to watch if they want to. And it goes through these ideas and talks about relationality. We can't understand a world that responds to us. Like this world we live in is responsive to the choices we make. We can't understand that if there's some objective reality out there that we're like the synchronicities that happen to me will negatively influence you, for instance. Like it's a zero-sum game. Like that can't be the way it works if synchronicity is a real thing. It has to be relational, where the world I'm experiencing is presented from my consumption, and it's consistent with your world, but your world is presented to you for your consumption. And there's ways for the experiences we have to connect us and to be beneficial to both of us without conflicting. I'm not influencing what's happening in your world, but I am selecting on branches of the tree in which the things happen that are meaningful to me.
Do you think the sense of division that exists now within societies is the result, like what I mentioned earlier, result of individuals being able to express themselves through social media and basically open ways of communication? Because the kind of unity that a lot of people seem to have the sense of or illusion of were dependent on very limited channels of interpretation and distribution of information. Relatively speaking, limited TV channels, newspapers, magazines, basically all talking about the same thing with maybe a little bit of variety. But this explosion of knowledge and information and just channels of being able to express yourself as an individual has created this sense of, everything is falling apart. But it seems to be an opportunity for people to actually get to the higher truth and level up, like what you were saying.
Yeah. Well, I think, and this is the beauty of climate change as a challenge. Climate change is devastatingly overwhelming, but it reflects the rising of our inner subconscious. Just like the water levels are rising, it reflects the level of tension and anxiety that is rising in us as we come to terms and to grips with our choices. Because climate change, again, is all about choices. We go through the motion of our consuming life, and I don't advocate not consuming. I'm very much moving forward rather than back in my understanding of how we address these things. Mm-hmm. But there are certain things we do in our consumer culture that just don't make any sense. And so what's called for is a fierceness and a courage to call these things out when they happen, to talk about it. Like there's no lack of resources. The problem is just waste. We don't have to waste. If we use the resources we need, there's enough, and it won't demolish the planet. There's these green compostable sandwich bags, right? Or wrappings that you can get that are made from vegetables. Like the solutions are there to provide pretty low cost plastic alternatives for certain applications. Why don't we use those for everything? That's a much deeper human question that has to do with the way we think and the way we solve problems. It doesn't actually have to do with the reality of the situation. So I think as we become more aware of what's driving our choices, as we do this inner work to become aware of the feelings that are hidden in us that we're acting out in our lives, we will start to resolve some of those things, and climate change will be one of the global movement of people needing to become more self-conscious, more self-aware, and human first.
Yeah, I think the disservice with respect to climate change is that a lot of people, again, within governments have made the choice to capitalize on a very real problem in order to expand on their power, monopolizing on their power. And, the fact is that I believe that climate change, I mean, how can you not believe? I live in South Florida. Everybody know that the climate is changing and it has real consequences and facts that we have to deal with. But the question is, if it's a scientific phenomena, which it is, there isn't going to be any specific or solid political solution for it. Rather, allow science and technology to determine the problems and then solve them through providing solutions that are determined based on supply and demand and competition. So I think that's a huge disconnect, that there are a lot of people who are not arguing that there is no climate change, but there are a lot of people, quite correctly, who don't have belief in their political representatives who say, yeah, it's a problem, but we have to do this. We have to raise your taxes, for example, that might affect this less than 1%, but you're just giving more and more power to the state. But again, it's part of the choice, right?
So there's the potential for government to solve it. There's a potential for businesses and organized organizations to solve it. And then there's the underlying cause, which is the way we think as human beings.
Right.
This is not separate from us as individuals.
Yep.
And we are part of it. And we can't disconnect ourselves from it. We're immersed in a system that we built or people before us built, and that's okay. We don't have to reject that system, but we are part of it. And I think that by doing the work on ourselves to become less reactive, to become more courageous, so that when we're in a meeting, in a business meeting, we actually influence the direction of that meeting for values that we really stand for. How many of us, when we're faced with stating our values in a public situation, how many of us really have the courage to do that? So I think that there's work that can be done at an individual level as we empower ourselves, and it's not even focused on climate change. It's focused on, as we empower ourselves, we build systems which are largely local and are networked and focus on empowering whatever it is that we're bringing to the world. And I think the beauty of flow, of living in flow, is that when we live that way, whatever it is that we create comes from our own inner self. It's like not aimed to solve a problem. It's coming from who we want to be in the world.
Yeah.
And when we become who we want to be in the world, we start to solve those problems. And there's a natural synergy between the personal and the collective that isn't focused on an ideology about, solving the collective. It just unfolds from being fiercely authentic.
So it would be fair to say that choices are up to us, but the options that are being presented to us are not up to us, because everything is affected by everything, right?
Yeah, I like the way you said that earlier.
Yeah, so the next thing would be, if we want to talk about many world theories and alternate universes, how the choices that are being made in those world and alternate universes have effect on this reality that we're experiencing.
Well, this is where I have a different view from what most people consider many worlds. Many worlds it grew out of the mathematics of quantum mechanics, because quantum mechanics basically says, look, there's this thing called unitary evolution where everything is branching into all the possibilities that it could branch into, and these are all tree branches, and they're all equivalent. There's no way to choose between them. But we obviously live in a world that's made choices, right? We're here and not there because we chose to live here and not there. So how do we end up on one of those branches and not remain in some combination of all of them? And we feel in this world like we're obviously on a single branch of the tree. We're obviously experiencing one reality. So that's what the mathematics shows, is that there's just all these branches. And then we still are trying to wrestle with, how do we get to one real physical reality? When the many worlds hypothesis came along, people were just taking what I think is a simple answer to saying there are all these actual physical worlds in parallel, and choices in one world might affect another world. I think what the mathematics really shows us is that, like a video game, there's this information encoded with the potential for all these worlds, potential for all the choices. But you wouldn't say, if you're playing your multiplayer online video game, that there's an actual video game version that's doing a different thing. You're experiencing the one video game reality that you're experiencing. You don't think about the other worlds, and they're actually not rendered, right? They were never rendered on your computer frame.
Minecraft has different servers. I actually think about them on alternate universes in the context of Minecraft.
Okay.
That you create your own server, you create your own world, but those are disconnected from each other.
Right. That's an interesting perspective. I'll have to think about that. Yeah. And when you have this collective, consistent set of worlds or a consistent world that is consistent between all the computers, that's the relational model, right? You've got a video game that's rendered for you in front of you on your own computer, and yet it's synchronized via processes of, like, optimistic synchronization is one of them that I refer to in the book. It's synchronized with all the other computers to give the illusion that there's this objective, definite world that you're all interacting in. But the reality is you're dealing with the world right in front of you. And then there's processes in place to make it synchronize. So the many worlds is useful to understand the choices that we make, to understand how we and the future options, like the experiences that we want to have, might be on this branch and not on this branch. And so the first branch is going to have an apple on it, which weighs it down and makes it more likely and brings some kind of synchronicity, which leads me there out of the blue. So it's useful in that regard, but I don't think those physical branches interact or are real in any way. They're potentiality in the same sense that the wave function in quantum mechanics is a potentiality. There's nothing physical about it until a measurement occurs, an interaction occurs. So I think it's useful and important not to go too far into the many worlds hypothesis, interpreting it as if there's like a whole plethora of other me's out there in the world. That's very much overstating what we know to be true. Mm-hmm. Yet there's all these potentialities that we're choosing between, and I think that's very important and useful.
If we say that choices are the only aspect of free will that we are experiencing, that options are provided to us, yet we make the choices between the options that are provided to us, would it be fair to say that we are making those choices on the basis of a foundation that are built based on the values that we have received from our family and culture and society, and we read books, but none of them are as solid as we might expect that they themselves can change fundamentally? This is the example I used with Chris Nebar too, that when I was born in Iran, I was 1 second old, and immediately it was placed on me that I was an Iranian Shia Muslim male straight. And to get away from either of those, it's a lifetime of battle and conflict, even if you're going to be successful in those things. So is it recommended to people to reassess those fundamental values that they identify with and identified by in order to make different kind of choices?
Absolutely. A lot of the work I do and some of the research I do has to do with identity and how we, in this video game analogy, through our experiences, we take on certain beliefs or certain identities. My parent yells at me in a situation where I'm not at fault and I feel that's unjust, but I take on an identity that when I'm in that kind of situation, here's how I respond. Maybe I don't defend myself because it's not safe, and so I just take on this unjust behavior as my own. And so that's the identity that I take on, that I carry with me in my future. And so we are constantly through our life creating identity through the choices that we make and the way we respond to situations that happen to us. The work that I do in my course and that I teach is about understanding how we have created those identities from our experiences, and what the feelings are that are happening, that we're resisting. When we hold on to the feelings that we don't want to have, we perpetuate that identity. And when we can actually experience everything that's happening in us, notice when we feel shame or disappointment or whatever else it might be, we begin to have a broader understanding of what's possible. So someone might invite me to a party that I would never go to because my particular race or nationality would never go. And yet, through having done this work and realizing what are the feelings that I'm resisting in that situation, I might have a very different choice, and I might have a very different experience by going to that event. And I will open and grow in some way that I wouldn't have otherwise. So I think that we are really called to, what you're talking about is healing work, peeling away layers of identity that may not fit us, and that it's really emotional work. And I don't mean emotional like you got to sit down and cry and have a bunch of expressed emotions. I mean noticing the physical experience that we're having and getting to a point where we're actually able to not be tense around it. And from there, we can make choices that are really aligned with the part of ourselves that's 6 years old and really just knows kind of where it's going and what's important to it, rather than the layers that have been built on top of that, which are trying to control our experience.
Yeah, and healing itself begins by making a choice to be healed. Otherwise, if you think that it's all good and you don't need to be healed, you just, you carry this, what I call involuntary baggage with you, and you don't really feel comfortable. You don't really feel like yourself, but it is what it is, right? So this need to be healed is like the need to have a conversation first before being able to have open conversation. That's very important. And I think this world is helping for that, because a lot of things start to coming up that people, I always say about Donald Trump, that take him like a psychedelic, because he's forcing all of us to reassess our values and where we stand,
Yeah.
Rather than right or wrong.
Yeah.
And it's an opportunity.
It absolutely is. And that's why living in flow is such a powerful way to look at the world and to live our life. It's not just a philosophy. I do base it on mathematical formulation of how quantum mechanics works, which is controversial to some extent, but is supported by the research I do and has been published and continues to be. I continue to publish on it, but it's essential to recognize options that we are being shown. What I think is, and this is my guess from my own experience, that the ultimate goal is freedom of the human being. And freedom doesn't mean doing whatever you want based on neurotic hidden emotions that you have built up, right? Freedom means freeing yourselves from those hidden emotions.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And so it's that you're not controlled by other people's needs of you, because your emotions are not stopping you and holding you back anymore.
Yeah.
And then when we do that work and free ourselves from our hidden emotions, we naturally respond to people with compassion and empathy and intelligence and fierceness, and hold them accountable. All these things that go along with a healthy adult personality. They come naturally when we've freed ourselves from our own limitations and constraints and emotional baggage.
Sky's book is called Living in Flow, The Science of Synchronicity and How Your Choices Shape Your World. And you mentioned that you had a course, and I'm showing it to our viewers as a special limited time offer, 50% off a second registration. This is at youthrivehere.com. So what made you write the book and start the course to begin with at this point in our history?
Well, I've been studying synchronicity because I had those kind of experiences, like I described the one about being in Paris, and realized that it was either in my head or there was something fundamental happening there. I also had been enthusiastic about some aspects of the mathematics of science and quantum mechanics when I was in college. And so over the last 20 years, these threads have been coming together, both the interest I had in physics and the experiences I was having of synchronicity. And about 10 years ago, I started really researching and publishing on this officially. And then when academia is a slow process. You get stuff published and it doesn't get read, or it gets read by very highly technical people. And I noticed the need to have a dialogue with people at a non-technical level. When you pay attention to this stuff in your life, it really changes the way that we think, at least that I've thought about my life and the choices I make. So I started a book about 6 years ago and ended up getting it published last year. and in the process realized, the importance of flow. And because it's not just a mental game of how we're going to like start paying attention to synchronicity and understand synchronicity. Understanding how synchronicity works through this process of the apple tree and the meaningful history selection helps our left brain get a hold of it, but it's our right brain, in a sense, that has to choose it, has to live it in the world. And that's what being in flow is about. And so once I published the book, through various synchronicities and people sort of giving me clues, I realized a great way to teach this material at a deeper level, to integrate it into personal experience, is to create a video course. So I created a video course with 19 videos and topics that range from living from the heart and finding authenticity to finding your own power. All of these things that arise from becoming more able to get into flow by practicing letting go of emotions that we're holding on to, or stopping the resistance of those emotions. And each module has exercises that go with it that help you integrate, because you have to actually practice this material in your life and not just have an intellectual understanding of it in order to have it make a real difference. So I think that there are ways that we can heal, and we have to heal as human beings in order to solve the outer problems that we're facing. And some of that healing involves our own personal lives. When we can see synchronicity as the stepping stones in our life that show up on a day-to-day basis that can get us to the next thing, we feel less hopeless, we feel less frustrated, and we start to get into a deeper relationship with not only the people in our lives, but with life as a whole, and find our way step by step. Even though we don't know what the end zone is going to be, we can have faith that we will build momentum towards what it is in the life that we want to have. So those are the things I teach in the course. And there's also some personal component where we meet online and on the Facebook group and have dialogue.
Very cool. And it really goes back to individual, right? Like we talked about, that this goal of freedom, if it's not defined on the individual basis, it's really undefinable, because it has different kind of variety and different kind of interpretation based on that subjective observer and experiencer.
Yes. And ultimately, if you as a listener want to have make a really difference in the problems that you see in the world, I would suggest that you can have that difference by diving into your life in the most authentic, full-hearted way that you can, because that's where you will have an effect not only on the things you do, you will also synchronistically bring about opportunities for healing in the world. Whether it's something through the work that you do or through your personal lives and the way people experience you, the best and only real thing that we can do is come into our lives by healing those blocks that we have and becoming wholly ourselves.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's why I believe that each individual is his or her own best guru as well, rather than going to find. It seems to me like if you go and look for a guru in its conventional sense, it is yet another way for you to try to justify where you stand and victimize yourself in a way that, hey, look at poor little me, I need some guide. But it really is about doing the hard work and look within yourself. And who said that the best way to deal with other people's darkness is to understand your own darkness?
Yeah. I think a lot of people probably said that. The Dalai Lama, and but yes, absolutely.
Okay, Sky, what's next for you? And aside from your Twitter handle, which is Nelson_Sky, where can people follow your future works?
Well, you can find the course at thletteruthrivehere.com/livinginflow. You can find my website and a lot of videos related to the work I do, including some animations that are already out and coming out soon on my website, skynelson.com. I'm pretty active on YouTube. I have a lot of great video content there under Sky Nelson. And join my email list and stay in touch. And I love to hear stories of synchronicity or understand how this work impacts you and has influenced you. I think it's really important that we do this work. I'm also releasing an album. So I recorded an album last year at the same time that I was writing this book. And I held off on releasing the album so that I could release the book first. And now the album's coming out starting in February. So I'd love to have people check that out when it comes out.
Excellent. Sounds awesome. Well, I give you two of my synchronicity stories before I ask you the last question. Uh, there must have been more than two, but the two that stick with me. The first one is how I met my girlfriend, that we met through online dating. We both had set our radius to find people at 1 mile, and we found each other and went out on a date, and we're still together, more than 5 years at this point. But the biggest one in my life was winning the US green card lottery, that I applied for myself and my mother after becoming the Canadian citizen. I didn't even have any interest. I always wanted to be in the US. I hang the US flag on my room in Tehran since I was like 19. But when I became a Canadian citizen, I was like, this is fine. This is a fine country. I can travel to the US anytime. And a couple months after that, my mom asked me to apply for her because she's still in Iran. She didn't want to leave. And I did that. And then I thought, you know what? I'm just going to do it for myself. I never believed in it, but I was like, I'm just going to do it. And then I didn't check it more than a year after, which I had like a couple of weeks left until the end of the deadline to apply for the registration and all that. So I checked for my mom. She hadn't won. I checked for myself, and I'd won the lottery.
Wow.
And the thing is, it put everything for me in perspective, because for years, I had a huge problem with the country that I was from, the culture and all of that. But the only reason I could win the green card diversity lottery process was because I was born in Iran, and was because I had pressed that submit button and that millisecond that it was pressed, because it's an automated lottery system.
Right.
And after that, I was like, what am I worried about anymore?
That's the needle in the haystack right there.
Yeah. I mean, 15 million people that year had applied, 125,000 won the lottery, and 50,000 out of that 125,000 ended up getting it.
Well, so the way that the process of meaningful history selection would describe that is saying, yes, and this is really empowering for people, I think. Yes, there is a whole very low odds of something happening. But when that's not what it's about. It's not about when doing it just right, clicking the button at the right time or whatever it might be. That's what ultimately looks like it led to it from here to there. But what's happening is this connection to the future possibilities and the way that you are acting in your life to make choices with the intent of having that experience of being in the United States. And so those future outcomes where you have the experiences you want to have make it necessary that the number is crunched in just the right way to give you that experience.
Wow.
And so that's why it happens. It's just selected for, out of all the possibilities, that particular number crunching is selected in order to give you that experience.
So intention is the key.
I talk about it as anticipated experience. So it's related to intention, but intention can be, we can have unconscious intentions and not realize it.
Right.
Anticipated experience is just whatever it is that we are holding our breath for, consciously or unconsciously. That's what is becoming more probable through the weight of the apples on that tree.
What are your thoughts on the book that came out, The Secret? And Oprah talked about it, that if you want something to happen to you, just visualize it. Like if you want to have a Porsche, for example, put a photo of a Porsche on the wall and just look at it and visualize it. And some people expanded on that not only looking at it is not only enough, you have to believe and put yourself feeling-wise and emotional-wise as if you already have the Porsche and driving the Porsche and all of that. And then inevitably it will happen at some point in your future.
Here's what I think. I think that if we are seeking for answers to try and have the things we want to have happen in life, and we're seeking ways to make that happen through story vision boards, there might be work to be done on ourselves as to understanding why we're dissatisfied. I think that we are creating or selecting, not creating, but selecting probability or possibilities based on our anticipation of experiences. But we are not even clear as to why we want certain experiences. So the best work we can do is to do that healing work, that inner work, and not be seeking for the external validation. Ultimately, when we get free of that external validation, I think that the world is responsive. The cosmos responds to us. But it's not a goal to try and manipulate that and figure it out. It's a goal to find who we are in the world.
Go with the flow.
To get into flow. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, this was awesome, man. I really hope that we do this again. at some point, because a lot to uncover in this awesome world of uncertainty that, you know, everybody can find their own way, everybody can realize who they are and where they stand. And
Yeah.
definitely your perspective is awesome to be in addition
Human
to
first.
human first, indeed. It starts all from there. Let me ask you the last question. You probably heard it in the episodes that you listen to, that if you come across an intelligent alien from a different civilization, what would you say is the worst thing humanity has done, and what would you say is our greatest achievement?
Ah, well, I think the thing that holds humanity back is our self-doubt and self-criticism. And that's at the core of everything negative that we do. So turning things against ourselves and holding on to pain and criticizing ourselves is the source of all the bad stuff that we've created. And the greatest thing that we've done, that's a really interesting question. I think that you know, I would say that the amount of work that we as a collective species have done to understand, authentically understand, without hidden motive, authentically understand who we are, what we're doing here, and what we can do to make this experience optimized or better for the human soul, the human condition. The fact that we're on that path, we've made a lot of progress on that path, and we can make further progress on that path is a testament to who we are.